really with the guidance of the guidance of the course and the home method, and even the podcast, we did focus firstly on what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to feel, and that was, despite the fact, all a lot of mechanics and market considerations inevitably come in, having that, the objectives and the feeling and the function as that primary guidance certainly helped us clarify what we wanted. And a lot of that was about having that pleasant experience.
Well, Ben, I am so looking forward to this conversation that we're going to be having today, because I know that you're going to have a wealth of experience and insight and perspective to share with the Undercover Architect community. You and I have actually got to know, well, I've got to know your project fairly well because we've had some one-to-one Zoom consults across the course of your project as
Yeah.
well. And I was reflecting on the experience of knowing you through your project and seeing the development of your project over that time, and also seeing the development in how you have shifted how you approach your project and how you're operating in your project as well. And so I think it's going to be a really great opportunity to share from that experience to the Undercover Architect community, an incredible wealth of knowledge that you've been able to gain, and also your own, I suppose, insights and experience of how you've seen yourself kind of handle your project as well. So I think it's going to be a really, really good conversation. I'm wondering if, before we dive into talking about your project details, you can just share a little bit about yourself and who this project is actually for.
Sure. Hi. Yeah, obviously my name's Ben. This project is for me and my partner, Mike. We live in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, kind of in a middle suburb. We've both been in Melbourne for about 13 years, but I still have this American accent that I don't think I'll ever get rid of. And we were really looking for, we've been here for a long time. We spent a lot of time living in small apartments or units, or what we kind of felt was just, compromise and temporary accommodation. And then several years ago, after we bought our first house, we really were focusing on somewhere that we wanted to live for the long term. And this project that we're currently doing is the second house that we've been in here in Melbourne, and it's a renovation and extension of a 1920s Californian bungalow.
We've got a few members in the community who are doing Californian bungalow renovations. I mean, it's a very prolific style of architecture through Australia.
Yes, I've been mining everyone else's experience. It's been really helpful.
Awesome. And so can you tell us a little bit about your project, what you're, I suppose, planning on doing in terms of the renovation, and even if we can touch on possibly how that might have shifted and changed in your thinking as you've navigated your project as well?
Yeah, it has actually shifted to a degree. When we were considering this project in the first place, we actually did purchase this house with the intention of doing an extension, because it's a largely unrenovated home that was, I think it was originally 2 bedrooms, and it was moderately extended, I think in the 70s, with a small lean-to at the back to where it's ostensibly 3 bedrooms, but I'm going to call it 2.5, and 1 bathroom. So once we purchased it, or as we were looking to purchase, we figured some kind of open plan extension at the back would make a lot of sense. And we tried to do a level of due diligence on what could be feasible before we did purchase. Once we purchased and started working with the designer, we also took into consideration the level of work that we wanted to do compared to what the market looked like for renovated Californian bungalows in in Melbourne's inner southeast, and decided to, instead of we definitely knew we wanted 2 bathrooms, and instead of a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom home with an open plan extension, we decided to aim for 4 bedrooms because of that market consideration.
And so we're looking at a house that kind of doesn't have a lot of clarity in the layout in terms of what a lot of those Californian bungalows have been like. They can be a bit of a rabbit warren
Yes.
and can be quite dark and pokey in parts as well. You've got a great site, which is sort of north to side, in terms of its
Yes, East Terrain.
orientation.
Yes.
And so extending out into that backyard so that you can get far more light into the home, and then creating clarity about how you circulate through the home, and adopting some of those strategies that we talk about in Home Method, about those bolt-on extensions that enable you to capitalize new
Yes.
build efficiencies and in that sort of pavilion style extension. And you're also you're planning to put a pool in the back garden as well, aren't you?
Yes, budget dependent, but that's it's definitely on the goals list, and it's in the plans.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
going to do our
Awesome.
best.
Now, when you think back to the beginning of your project, can you remember what you were, I suppose, nervous about, and what sent you down the pathway of starting to look for extra help and researching some of that education kind of support, and then I suppose also jumping into Home Method as a means of being able to support you?
Probably the biggest thing on my mind was the level of uncertainty and just unknown about what a big renovation project looked like. We ended up joining Home Method when we lived in our last home, and in our last home, which we did some minor renovations on, and new kitchen, revised bathroom, and some other things. We were able to do each one of those pieces as an individual project, which was helpful and a wonderful learning in terms of what's required, how many unknown surprises you might encounter in a renovation project, and then all the decisions that you need to make. So knowing then how much of a learning curve that was, to then consider a project where we would be engaging a builder to undertake a lot of work at the same time, or in close succession and in sequence, was really told me that we needed some outside help. And I'm a built for work. I'm a built environment professional, I call it, pretty much with a town planning background, and knowing a lot of that's about knowing what you don't know, and being willing to engage expert advice and outside expertise to really get the outcome that you're looking for. So that's really what led me to try to get educated and engage, not just the expert advice, but the community inside Home Method.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think you've been a really conscientious student. Like, I've watched how you've really dug in and been
Sometimes too much, yeah.
but it's been really great to see your appetite for learning around these things. And I do see that be a consistent thing with some Home Method members, that they have dabbled in a smaller scale of project before. It's kind of it's opened Pandora's box on realizing, oh, actually this is just a kitchen, or this is just a bathroom, and I've still got to make all of these decisions and navigate and negotiate all of these processes. I'm not going to do this blindfolded for a whole house where I'm dealing with structure and services and a lot more spend and a much more chunky and time sort of consumptive process. So so it's great that you got that, to dip your toe in the water of that experience and then realize that needed a bit more help and support with this. So now, when you were thinking about at the beginning of your project about the design and what you were going to prioritize, and how it was going to work for you and for Mike and your lifestyle overall, what were you ultimately wanting to create? You touched on that kind of fourth bedroom as the resale piece. And I'm curious, sort of, I suppose, what was really driving some of the decisions about not only the rooms that you wanted to include, but how you sort of saw those being arranged to really suit your lifestyle and your long-term goals in the home.
That's a really good question. Really, with the guidance of the guidance of the course and the Home Method, and even the podcast, we did focus firstly on what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to feel, and that was, despite the fact, a lot of mechanics and market considerations inevitably come in, having that, the objectives and the feeling and the function as that primary guidance certainly helped us clarify what we wanted. And a lot of that was about having that pleasant experience and respite and restful, pleasant, enjoyable place to exist, and something that we felt was not just reflected the way that we wanted to live, but reflected us ourselves. Like, I don't think Mike and I necessarily have terribly either sort of unique or special circumstances compared to other households, but it was being able to actually make some of the choices ourselves about what was included, which I didn't really appreciate before we did that first renovation. But um, there's also something about being able to achieve that pleasant home experience, feeling like a sense of accomplishment in terms of the careers that we've built, the work that we've done, the efforts that we've put into a whole bunch of different things, and having that in a way reflected in a really pleasant at home experience ended up being a key factor. And then also gaining appreciation of the spaces inside and outside that we want to experience, both separately and together. Our previous house had a bit of it was a wonderful bush block, I'd say, in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, and beautiful, and so many trees and birds. But it was this 50s home that didn't really take into account the fall of the land that well, and it was actually difficult to spend. The block was over 800 square meters, but it was actually really hard to use it and to be outside and to have a bit more, the indoor outdoor connection, the ability to pleasantly enjoy the outdoors without making a special effort was really important to us. And having separate spaces in the house and together spaces in the house, those are both really important. And you talk to different people in relationships, and sometimes the second bathroom is the marriage saver. I'd say that sometimes the second lounge room is the marriage saver. So we had all those considerations really going on at the same time.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I find that over the years, obviously, of working as an architect and then speaking to other architects and designers as well, I think there's this general kind of public perception that all houses are kind of pretty similar. They're all sort of that 3 to 4 bedrooms, all a couple of bathrooms. Like if we just look at sort of cutting through the mean average of what a house actually is like, and then 1 or 2 living spaces, and I think with that assumption that all houses look the same, there then can become a natural assumption that all people live in all houses all the same. And then it's only once I think the general public, if they spent time sort of thinking about how their friends live and use their spaces, and they'd probably realize that that's not necessarily a true statement. I know as architects and designers, we obviously get to sit at the coalface of clients and homeowners, and inside the Undercover Architect community, it's a huge range of homeowners using their homes in different ways. And so I always love meeting couples and understanding how do they specifically need, to use that combination of rooms to create something that actually sets up their ability to live together long term, to be able to have the lifestyle that they want, to be able to have balance and peace and harmony. There's a lot, obviously, of research around the fact that couples are, you've got 1 in 2 marriages ending in divorce, and at the same time, if you do stay together, you're together for decades. We're all living a lot longer. And there's so much to be said for thinking about the specifics of how you use the various rooms in your home and what you include to create relationship harmony, to create space and to create the ability to have, I think, identity and personal expression in spaces without it compromising somebody else's ability to do that as well. So, and if you've got a partner who is disorganized and doesn't like putting things away, but you're somebody who really likes everything being uncluttered, even just how do you factor that into the house so that you're not constantly niggling at each other about all of those kinds of things. And I love how the two of you, in my conversations with you, have created a lot of clarity around, you both know how you need the spaces to be. And even through the reworking of the design across this process, you've stayed true to really assessing, okay, is this going to work for us, whilst balancing, of course, the economic side of things of how this is going to work from a financial point of view, being, you know, our largest asset. So it's have you found that in terms of your conversations with your own designer, you know, and kind of expressing how you need to use the space, has that been easy enough to communicate? Like, how has that sort of worked for you in discussion of the brief and getting those spaces done well in the home?
I think it was. I'm glad you mentioned a lot of that because reflecting on where we were at the beginning, it was actually somewhat challenging to either conceive or verbalize some of those preferences that we had. The fact that we did want, you know, two separate sleeping spaces as well as living spaces. And that was important in being able to talk about that and own it and not just making sure that we were focusing on that this house was for us and not for the way other people might perceive it for some reason, and helping build that confidence and clarity definitely helped. But then at the same time, almost ironically, dealing with designers and experts, it was, even though I was so aware of that, I was in search of outside experts and that professional expertise, still then feeling somewhat intimidated that I either didn't know how things worked or would suggest something that didn't make sense, or that I would, worry or overthink something too much, and it's all going to work out. It's all going to be fine. And Mike is very much it's all going to work out and it's going to be fine. And I'm almost like, well, I want to hear it now. And how is this actually going to work? And take me through it. So it was about navigating, personally and professionally with a design professional, but then also, learning how to work with your other half through that process in kind of like in that triangular way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because there's so many components that come into it that you actually don't realize once you're into it, how many competing kind of interests there are, how many agendas you need to juggle, how you then need to I suppose, have a voice through all of that, and how then you have a relationship through all of that, and how you then create trusting relationships with the professionals that you're working with. Like, it's a lot to kind of contend with. And I know that when we've had our one-to-ones, we've had jokes about who gets the walk-in robe and who gets the ensuite
Yes,
versus
right.
who gets, we were, teasing Mike the other day about how big his robe was. Could he give up some of that to get the plan to work a little bit better, and, that kind of stuff. And I think this is the thing, like these conversations, I think, happen in these intimate relationships between the way that we've been able to talk about your project, and then obviously the relationship that you've created with your designer and your builder, the builders that you've been talking with. But it doesn't necessarily happen at a larger scale throughout society, that these are the kinds of things that we're discussing in terms of how we're going to actually physically use this house personally. So I love that I really love that you've worked that out for yourself. And also, seeing how you and Mike do operate together, I think it's actually been a really fantastic complement of skills, because ultimately it's feeding into the project. And I said to you before we jumped on that I've watched your ability to be more decisive in your project really develop. And that's been fantastic to see, particularly given that you're still in the design phase. It's going to pay massive dividends during construction. That your ability to lean into making committed decisions to things has really enhanced, and I think that's come in partnership with you becoming more and more, owning more and more what you actually want from this home and from this project, and then having the confidence to be able to verbalize that and have agency for that in the communication that you've had with your team. So can we talk a little bit, because you've had a little bit of an interesting process in terms of how you've navigated. It's not that unusual. We've had lots of other members go through it. I know that there are people in general public who will navigate their project in terms of looking at redesigns and things like that. They'll do it for years, whereas you've obviously just done it the once over. Can you talk through I suppose, just bring us up to speed on you're in the design stage, but it's in a second version of your design. So can you talk us about how you've sort of got to where you're at, and I suppose then explaining where you're at in your project?
Yeah, we came, the first design that we worked on with these designers came together over quite, I'd say quite a long period of time. It was probably a year and a half. It is really helpful, think not telling yourself it's going to be 3 years at the outset. You just tell yourself it's going to be 12 months, and then and then if it gets longer, it's fine. So, it's all about, not getting overwhelmed. But we put this design together through a lot of discussions with the designer, and sometimes it really was push and pull. There were aspects of the design in the first instance that we didn't feel were right, and were, I think, mostly successful at that time in seeking some changes. And then at the end of last year, really ended up with a design that I guess it felt more than good enough. That was very good, and on balance was the right thing to go forward with. Not only because yes, it met a lot of our objectives, but also there was this, whether it was confirmation bias or what have you, that we had gone through a lot of these steps and we had made these decisions, and in a way, you have to keep going, and there's a limited amount of almost look back that you can get. We didn't use the pack process, especially with that first design. We didn't really engage builder's advice at all, I'd say, for that first design. And although there were some check-ins with builders for ballpark figures, as they tell you in the home method, those can't really be relied upon. And it was right. So, even taking into account the cost increase is through 2020, 21 into 22, the quotes came back from the builders in some cases 40% above what we thought our upper limit was, that we had already doubled. So I'm not sure what that multiple was compared to the original budget, but it was just beyond not just what we were comfortable spending, but just what was reasonable, over capitalizing. It just didn't make any sense whatsoever. There was one builder who came a lot closer, and then we started thinking about, okay, what do we do with this design? Do we do, how do we tweak this? Even taking into account, it's behind the walls that, as they say, drives most of the cost. And started really thinking about what we could do. Through that conversation, the changes, or what you could say compromises, the things that we were missing out on, it was actually a very interesting collection. We realized really two things. There was a bunch of things that there are several things we could take out of the design that we were happy to take out because we weren't really that committed to. And to be honest, weren't in our brief. And that was a good feeling on the one hand, but it's like, well, why were they there in the first place? But then the second thing was, all right, if we're going to, make more modifications or remove certain things, when does this start losing some of the specialness and things that we wanted to achieve with the house? And in addition to all the things that we could change and remove at the same time, this is, I think, what was really critical, the small niggling, either doubts or things that we weren't terribly, we thought weren't perfect, or were in the back of our minds that were compromises in that design, they were still there. So we were reducing all the good things, taking out what wasn't necessary, and still left with some of the question marks, we'll say. So then, at the risk of, extending this project even further, started thinking about, well, okay, so what we're thinking kind of top down, what if we did start thinking bottom up again? What might that look like? And again, at the risk of, you have to weigh up, is this going to be further analysis paralysis? What does this mean? And can we engage in that what if exercise in a contained, scoped way that would A, like allow us to keep our mental health, and B, actually result in a productive outcome that we could evaluate both objectively and subjectively. And the really helpful advice, I think it was from you, yes, inside the home method was, yeah, conduct some kind of feasibility study and put together two potential options and test them both in terms of finances and all the other decision criteria that we'd apply. Like, does this meet our brief? Is this the way that we want to live? How will this practically work? And we also tested, besides like testing one-to-one in the backyard, we also mined the real estate listings in within 10 kilometers of our house of where are the renovated California bungalows that people are trying to sell, and just went to so many of them, and also tried to find some display, or especially these inner suburban knockdown rebuild display homes, particularly to get a good understanding of how some of the open plan spaces work, and we took those analyses together, where we then decided, and we went back to our designer. We asked them to draw up these really potential two things: the reduced original design and the bottom up, we'll call it a new design because it is a new design, and ultimately decided that yes, we will likely be able to fall within our budget, but really more importantly, we are going to be a lot happier with the redesign, and it much better meets our brief, and we will be happier. So we decided to go that direction.
Yeah. And I know that when that was happening, there was an element, and there can be an element of feeling like you've wasted a lot of time to kind of get to that point where you're at. And what I loved observing was, instead of like what a lot of homeowners can do is they can punish themselves a lot. They can hang on to all of that sunk kind of effort and cost and time that sits in that design. They can almost cling onto it by their fingernails and think, no, we just have to keep our head down and keep going. It was such kudos to both of you that you took the pathway that you did to really get back up to helicopter view, to do that analysis, and then to commit to the new design, which you knew was actually going to satisfy your goals so much more closely, and then how quickly you've been able to just progress through as a result. It's been amazing to sort of see how I always feel, and I see it time and time again, no effort is wasted. It always teaches you something, and sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to learn the thing that you need to learn in order to get to the outcome that you need to get to. I've loved watching how quickly you've been able to just make this, happen. So really, in the grand scheme of things, I don't feel like you've lost much time at all, really, have you?
I don't think so. And I think it's a really good, appreciate the observation that we've been able to move through things and, own decision making. A little bit paradoxically, at the same time, I think one of the reasons we've been able to move through these is the advice that, again, from you, that not over owning technical aspects of the project, and having the professionals that you're dealing with, whether it's the builder, the designer, and other potential consultants you might have, expect them to do the work and do the job that you engage them to do. And if you think something needs to be done differently or more in a different way, just respectfully and professionally engage them on that. And that having that mentality, I think, also helped practically in the project, but also that that mental health, the mental strength going through something as lengthy as this.
Fantastic.
I get the most for the least, really, within reason. And most isn't just about sort of like quantity. It is about quality, and quality of experience, quality of materials, etc. How can we get the most for the least, and what drives the cost? I think that was a key part of, you know, podcast listening and research and home method and hearing from other people, understanding where what components or the way that you make decisions or the way that you include things or the sizes of things, how that's going to impact on your project so you can make those informed decisions. Because going through that first design, you will say yes and no to things, but won't really know what that means in terms of budget. So understanding some of the biggest drivers really helped us evaluate